recently, I've been looking into a lot of lost media, and I came across something that either isn't particularly well known or isn't often discussed. Let's investigate. If you enjoy internet mysteries, conspiracies, and true crime, feel free to subscribe and turn on notifications for more content like this. I also have a Patreon and a PayPal, so if you're interested in supporting the channel, feel free to check those out, links will be in the description. I'm sure you're aware of Hugh Hefner, we'll call him Hef, but if not, he was the founder and editor-in-chief of Playboy magazine, a publication featuring revealing photos of women and articles targeted towards men. He was certainly one of the most iconic womanizers of recent times, and when he wasn't married, it wasn't unusual for him to be in casual relationships with many women at once. After he died in 2017 at the age of 91, it was revealed that years earlier, he arranged for a casket to be lined with cement so his collection of tapes, photos and letters could be encased in it and dumped at sea. Before we dive into this theory, I just want to say, as with all my other conspiracy videos, that none of this is fact, it's just a theory that I came up with after doing some research. I don't even necessarily believe it myself, I'm just presenting the information as I found it so you can make your own mind up. The obvious reason for dumping the tapes, and the one given by the source who's referenced in articles about this, is to protect the reputations of the people who feature in them. No estimate of the number of tapes was given in any of the articles I read about this, but I'm guessing there were quite a few to fill a whole casket. They reportedly dated back from the 1950s to the mid-1990s, and during that time and after, a number of public figures have been associated with Hef and have visited the mansion, so the list of people who could feature on these tapes is extensive. As for the content of them, here's a quote from page6.com. There was a batch of tapes shot on 8mm and cinefilm, which were filmed during some of the orgies he enjoyed in the 70s. Some famous male movie stars too were in those videos, and had that come out it would have been a huge scandal. Hef also had thousands of photographs taken at photo shoots or given to him by the girls over the years. Marilyn Monroe was definitely in them, as well as many superstars who graced the pages of his magazine. Some of the women were in relationships and others never even made the magazine, but simply were partying with him. He had hundreds of other photographs of women who were not famous, but he had enjoyed one-night stands with or even short relationships. There were also audio tapes too. So it sounds like whatever is on those tapes could ruin reputations and relationships. There are some wild stories about the mansion and what went on inside it, so I imagine there's probably a lot of footage there that certainly wouldn't be classed as vanilla. But what if there's a darker reason that Hef went to such great lengths to make sure that no one would ever see the contents of that casket? The decision to put the tapes in a concrete-filled casket and dump them in the ocean is certainly a little bit extra, but it also suggests that they contain things that Hef really didn't want getting out. Sure, reputations could be ruined and marriages destroyed, and that's bad enough for sure. But maybe that's only scratching the surface. Before we speculate, let's take a quick look at the history of controversy surrounding Hef. The simple fact that he was a man who promotes female nudity and a promiscuous lifestyle was enough to spark backlash from feminists and religious groups way back when Playboy was founded. It was pretty much the first magazine to present those kinds of adult themes in a relatively sophisticated format, and a lot of people were uncomfortable with that. Hef has been involved in various scandals over the years which we'll discuss, but to his credit, he was an advocate of racial equality and LGBTQ rights, even as far back as the 1950s, which for the time was quite progressive. He also donated to charity, and various charity events were held at the Playboy Mansion. But according to many reports, the idyllic picture painted of the mansion was closer to fantasy than reality. A few women have spoken out about what life was really like, with common claims including that Hef was controlling and pushed the women to do things that they weren't comfortable with. Some claimed they were pressured into engaging in unprotected group activity and even taking drugs. A claim corroborated by Hef's ex-girlfriend Holly Madison, who wrote a memoir about her experiences. Here's a quote from the book. "Would you like a Quaalude?" Hef asked, leaning toward me with a bunch of large horse pills in his hands, held together by a crumpled tissue. "Okay, that's good," Hef said, nonchalantly. "Usually I don't approve of drugs, but you know, in the 70s, they used to call these pills thigh openers." In the book, she also mentions that the women had a curfew and that Hef threatened to evict someone before for getting back late. He also apparently didn't like them dating other men, even though he was okay to see as many women as he wanted, even having 7 girlfriends at one point. He controlled what the bunnies did, and they had to ask permission to go out without him, and if they were allowed, they had to be back by 9 PM. The bottom line is, Hef's relationships were transactional. There's a certain expectation that I guess needs to be met if you're being paid to be someone's girlfriend, but there are still lines that should never be crossed. Many of these women just thought that they'd be paid to be models or waitresses and dress in skimpy outfits. They did not sign up to be pressured into things that they weren't comfortable with. Holly even said herself that she didn't realise that there would literally be an expectation for her to sleep with Hef. I watched a couple of episodes for research purposes, then somehow got hooked watching The Girls Next Door, a reality show that first aired in 2005, which focuses on Holly, Kendra and Bridget, Hef's girlfriends at the time. There were a few moments that made me wonder if these women had almost been primed by their families to be in the position that they're in.
I don't get jealous of other girls because I was raised in a cloning lab to be the perfect woman for Hugh Hefner, so...
At one point in a later season, Kendra talks to her family about leaving Hef and the mansion, and they're not supportive at all. They literally just encourage her to stay.
I'm thinking about moving out of the mansion.
For heaven's sake, what are you going to do?
It's so safe. It's secure.
I know it's secure there. I know I have everything I could possibly want.
Who would leave that?
There's also an episode in season 2 where Bridget strips in front of her family, and one of them, it might have been a dad, but I couldn't really tell, wolf whistles. It's just so gross. Stuff like this just makes me wonder if some of the women's parents pushed them into the situation that they're in. I wonder if they were raised differently, if they'd still want to be living that life. Age obviously factors into it too. Kendra was only 18 when she moved into the mansion. More recently, years after her and Hef broke up, Kendra said that she didn't enjoy sleeping with him and she had to consume a lot of alcohol and other substances to survive those nights. Though for what it's worth, she claims that they remained friends after the breakup. In addition to being heavily criticised for the way he treated his girlfriends, Hef was accused of facilitating a non-consensual encounter between a woman and Bill Cosby, who also used quaaludes when assaulting women, and Hef himself has been accused of forcing himself on women. His lack of respect for women's consent is hardly surprising considering he literally referred to them as sex objects in an interview. The first ever issue of Playboy featured Marilyn Monroe, as Hef bought the rights to the photos from a photographer who was begged by Marilyn not to reveal her identity. She posed for them before she became famous, and Hef never asked her permission to include them in the magazine, even on the cover. They never actually met, but Hef appeared to have a bit of a weird obsession with her. When she died, he bought the plot next to her grave, and is now buried next to her. Marilyn wasn't the only woman whose photos were made public without permission. Vanna White appeared on the cover of an issue in 1987, though not through her own choice. She even begged Hef, who she considered a friend at the time, not to publish the photos, saying it could ruin her career, but he did it anyway. I could go on all day about this, but I think we've heard enough to suggest that Hef was a morally questionable man. Knowing everything he's been accused of by various different people, it really makes me wonder what's actually on those tapes. I'd be willing to bet money that it's more nefarious than just celebrities cheating on each other. I just get the vibe that the casket contains something incriminating. It's pure speculation, but I just don't think he would have gone to such great lengths to get rid of them, just to protect other people's reputations. He obviously made them in the first place for a reason. It doesn't make sense that he'd just randomly destroy them. And I just don't buy the story that the parties were getting wilder and wilder and he thought that someone might steal them. He had the money to hire a security guard to guard them constantly during parties if he was that worried, or he could have installed some kind of hidden compartment somewhere in his mansion so they'd never be found. In addition, knowing what Hef did to Vanna White, I have a hard time believing that he'd care enough about other people's reputations to destroy part of his life's work. So what could that casket contain? Best case scenario, I have an inkling that some of those people maybe didn't realise that they were being filmed. I mean, why would they consent to being filmed doing something that could ruin the reputation if it got made public? It just doesn't make sense. Even if everyone knew they were being filmed, It still doesn't seem unlikely that not all of them would have been in a position to consent to that, and whatever else was happening, possibly due to drugs or coercion. I can only hope that everyone who featured in those tapes were adults at least, but I don't even know that we can be sure of that. There have been rumours over the years that underage girls attended Hef's parties. Judy Huth claimed that she was a victim of Bill Cosby at the Playboy Mansion when she was just 15 years old. That's not necessarily to say that Hef was aware of that, but there are a couple of relevant things that make you wonder if he just turned a blind eye. In 1975, with her mother's permission, 10-year-old Brooke Shields posed naked for a Playboy publication called Sugar and Spice. I strongly advise you not to look for these photos. I read an article which showed a few that were censored, thankfully, but let's just say the tone of these photos does not seem innocent. I don't know if Hef personally approved these photos or what, but he was literally the founder of Playboy. If he had a problem with these images featuring in one of his publications, he could probably prevent it happening in the first place, or at least condemn it once it did, if he didn't personally oversee that. But as far as I could see, he's never spoken out about it. Similarly, Eva Ionesco is the youngest model ever to appear in the Playboy magazine, featuring at just 11 years old in a 1976 issue of the Italian edition of the magazine. I don't exactly know how magazine publishing works. Perhaps Hef didn't really get a say in the Italian edition, but again, surely he could have spoken out about that. Even if everyone at the mansion and whoever was filmed were adults, there are still so many vile possibilities, one being bestiality, which Hef was rumoured to be into. Linda Marchiano claimed that she was pimped out to Hef by her abusive husband and that he tried to make her have inappropriate contact with a dog. He said himself that he tried several times to get a girl and a dog together, but it never worked out. I also considered the possibility that in addition to serving as some kind of library for Hef, and probably a trophy too, perhaps those tapes were actually intended to be used for blackmail at some point. Or maybe some of them even were used for blackmail purposes before they were destroyed. Particularly if the people in them weren't even aware that they were being filmed, they probably contained so much that some people just wouldn't want making public, and would probably go to great lengths to prevent that from happening. It's a plausible possibility if you believe Stefan Tettenbaum's account of Hef and what went down in the mansion. Stefan was Hef's valet for a year starting in 1978, and in an interview with New York Post, recalled a few worrying stories from his time at the mansion. He said that the acts that the women took part in were so painful that they sometimes couldn't walk afterwards, and that Hef sometimes gave them bonuses in those situations. Stefan claimed that Hef always filmed the encounters and had a whole library featuring various different people, which corroborates the existence of these tapes to begin with. He was told that Hef planned to use the footage against his associates if they ever threatened to come out with a memoir about him or the mansion. But seriously, what has he got to hide? Many people already don't have a particularly positive opinion of him, and hearing some of the stories that are public knowledge from the mansion, as well as the fact that Hef had 7 girlfriends at one point, you can already imagine that he's probably pretty adventurous. To top it off, he openly admitted to trying to get a dog and a girl together on multiple occasions. If that's just something that he casually spoke about and didn't see a problem with, I can only assume that whatever it was he was trying to keep hidden was probably much, much darker. The pieces of the puzzle are all there. To me, it's not a question of whether or not this is a plausible theory, it's just simply, factually, is it true? I'm not sure we'll ever know the answer to that. Hef himself is dead, his head of security died in 2011, and any concrete evidence is God knows where in the middle of the ocean. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing and leaving your thoughts in the comments. Huge thank you to my patrons whose names are on screen now. I really appreciate your support. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on Thursday for a new video.